So whereas I guess Tony approached this from a consumer standpoint, I'm going to take a slightly different angle, and I'm going to approach it from that of a brand standpoint, or us as communicators. And at Mindshare, I look after a couple of our key clients on a multinational, that operate on a multinational basis. And I think it's that understanding of how they operate at a strategic level that affords me an insight into how we, as brands and communicators, can embrace new and emerging opportunities. And within Mindshare, I take that understanding and I apply it to all of our clients in a mobile capacity. So, similarly to Tony, I'm not a tactical mobile planner. I'm not a technical app developer, but instead I approach this from a strategic standpoint, and I help our clients understand practical application of mobile. So that's where I'm going to start with this. And I guess that said, there are a couple of things that I'm not going to do today. I'm not going to talk to you about staggering statistics that you've probably heard a million times already. So the size of the opportunity, I'm not going to dwell on. The staggering growth rate, you've probably heard a million times. Again, I don't want to talk about it. The third thing, the latest trends that are happening in the marketplace. I think you've all probably been aware of the app craze. Before that, it was QR codes, things like that. So I'm not going to talk about those, and I'm certainly not going to stand up here and tell you that this is the year of mobile, because we've all heard it a million times. Instead, what I want to do is talk about the practical application of mobile, and I want to show you some real-life examples of how our clients, many of you in the audience, are actually embracing mobile from a strategic standpoint. Now, one of the things that strikes me when we look at all of our clients, no matter what client we're talking about, what category, there's one common denominator across everyone, and that is essentially one thing. Every single client has some sort of a job to be done or objective. Usually it's measured in terms of a purchase funnel or something of the sort. And whether it looks like your traditional purchase funnel or something more linear, something perhaps more akin to what a creative agency would use, or even the latest McKinsey model. There are literally millions of these types of things. There's one thing in common, that they can be boiled down into a few core facts or tasks for any brand to communicate through. We largely like to think of them in terms of 4 buckets. The first is seek, largely awareness. The second is involve, so engagement. The third is action, and that can be everything from purchase all the way through to requesting a brochure or finding out more information. And then the last one is really about advocacy, and that's about sharing or loyalty. So if we boil it down to those 3, and we think about mobile in the context of those jobs to be done, there's one thing that's really striking to me, and one thing that separates mobile from any other piece of communication outlet out there. And to me, it all comes down to one word: versatility. Because what I would argue is that more than any other medium out there, this is the one channel that can actually deliver and has a role to play within every stage of that purchase process. You can argue about, the role for something like search, which I would say probably has a role to play in all of those as well. But aside from that, mobile is the only one that has a pivotal role that can feed through the lens across all of those. And I think largely it comes down to one thing. It's the fact that when we think about mobile, it's made up of a series of micro tactics within it. It's a virtual Swiss Army knife of options for communicating with your consumer. And whether it's WAP sites, whether it's apps, whether it's SMS, games, ringtones, whatever the case is, you have a virtual set of tools which you can use to communicate with those consumers across any one of those key tasks. Now, if we look at each of those and sort of boil them down, I just want to take you through again some practical examples of how our clients are tapping into each one of those tasks. Kimberly-Clark, great example in terms of broad mainstream awareness. Essentially, in the US, what they wanted to do was create a debate and get consumers talking, make them aware of one of their products called Cottonelle, which is a toilet tissue. Relatively low interest category, as I'm sure most of you would agree. But they created a huge debate and lots of controversy by posing one simple question: which way do you roll? And that is, does the roll go forward or does it go backwards? And they put this tag on all of their outdoor advertising, and by doing so, they also offered up a short SMS text code where you could text in your answer. it actually achieved huge results in terms of creating debate. They used celebrity endorsers to make this famous. And I think the most telling thing is, within one market, they had 175,000 votes within 1 week. And it was just by taking one simple point of controversy and actually facilitating conversation through the use of mobile. Again, great example of how they're using mobile to create awareness. HSBC, another good example. They wanted to create engagement with their consumers, and this was within China. Essentially, what they recognized was that 62% of their consumers were going out to eat at least more than one or more times a week. So obviously, being a credit card, they wanted to facilitate people's spending. So they created a lifestyle app where consumers could go out, find out about the latest restaurants, receive coupons to those restaurants, and that sort of thing. Great lifestyle app that they released in Shanghai. Hugely successful, 20,000 downloads within the first 2 weeks, 68,000 downloads within the first 6 months, and most importantly, what they recognized was that it increased the spending patterns of these consumers who were already out and about simply by facilitating something that they were already doing. So thereby creating an engagement with the consumer through a means or a device that they wanted to engage with. Third one, really simple example of action, essentially getting footfall into stores. Tony and Guy, one of our Unilever clients, had an outdoor campaign where they took over bus shelters and essentially had this collateral up there. On it, they simply put an SMS slug where you could text in and you would receive a voucher back for 20% off, and it also had the location of the stores nearest to you. Really simple mechanism for driving footfall into the stores. And in terms of results, it had 7% response rate, and 25% of consumers were actually looking for more information after they had seen the initial message. So again, in terms of driving through to purchase or conversion, SMS is an incredibly simple way to do it. Last one, Pepsi. They were looking to, in India, engage with a youth audience, and in doing so, they created what they called Youngistan. So, in essence, they were posing a question to the youth of India, asking them what it was like to be a youth. And in doing so, they asked consumers to text back their responses. In doing so, they got tons of responses, but more importantly, they got consumers to actually share this content and collateral amongst each other, and by doing that, they created simple send friend functions. They created ringtones which were bespoke to individual people, and they created essentially a currency which you wanted to share with your friends. Again, another really easy example of how something can be quite compelling just by having a call to action across your mainstream collateral. 600,000 impressions in the first 4 weeks, 2 million to date, and in terms of content downloads, WAP, that sort of thing, it all drove to an incredible amount of talkability and controversy and sort of chatter amongst the youth of India. So really great example of how you can create conversation by using something as simple as SMS. And I think if you understand all of those, and one of the things that I want to point out with those is that if you look across all of those, they're not all apps, they're not all developed markets, and they're not all youth brands. And that's because when we think about mobile, there's a bit of a shiny toy effect where we all jump on apps or the latest hot, cool thing, and we don't stop to think about actually the plethora of tactics within something as diverse as mobile. That said, I am going to come on to one of the best examples that I've seen in terms of mobile communications, and it happens to be from a youth brand. I think if you take each of those pillars in isolation and you understand how mobile can deliver on all of those, then you can start to think about a larger context and the role that mobile can play within a larger campaign. And I think this is a really good example of how they took mobile and made it the focal point of a campaign as opposed to an SMS that was just slugged on a piece of outdoor or whatever the case was. This is a great example of how all of those tasks come together where mobile really sits at the heart of the communication.
The X Effect has been launched in Japan in a major way with majorly impressive results. But as young guys took to the body spray with gusto, we noticed the gap. Guys weren't using it on a daily basis. And so, the challenge. Get guys to use Axe every day. Using traditional methods of media every day might have been very pricey. Then we hit on a small insight. Over 80% of young guys use their phone as an alarm clock. When we added Axe's unique seduction viewpoint into the mix, we made the leap. the Axe Wake-Up Service.
Axe Wake-Up Service.
All roads now lead to a unique piece of content on the mobile phone. A mobile application that means young Axe guys are woken up by beautiful women every morning. We introduce guys to the girls through online, print, poster, web films and even TV, as they found interesting ways of reminding guys they should spray on Axe daily. You could access through the toll-free number, of course staffed with Axe girls. Register and you are on your way. Scroll through the angels, read their profiles, and you can even choose the angel you woke up with next day. Just set the time and sleep well. On morning one, things were all very professional.
起きてください。朝はちゃんと起きないと。アックスも毎日ちゃんと使ってね。
今日もおはようございます。真面目な人、私大好き。
The longer you were subscribed, the more personal the wake-ups became.
ゆうです。起きた？なんか未来の予感がしてくるね。
Yes, well, if you ignore your wake-up call,
ちゃんと毎朝アックス使わないとお仕置きだぞ。
the Axe Wake-Up Service, a simple mobile application that is unique, desirable, seductive, sticky, and very, very Axe.
So, a bit polarizing. But I think, aside from it being a youth brand, it's a really good example of how you can actually use mobile for the pillar of all of your communications. I mean, at the heart of this was a simple mobile app that was essentially an alarm clock. Beneath that then, and around it, what they created was a series of collateral and content which drove awareness to this mobile app. And it was phenomenally successful. It had over 1 million site visits within the first 4 weeks. 200,000 participants actually downloaded the app. And beyond that, you can imagine the type of controversy that this created and talkability amongst the target audience. So again, a really good example of how you can use mobile to deliver on actually the 4 pillars of this purchase process. So I think the last thing that I'll leave you with is a really good quote which sort of sums up where we are today and where I started this presentation. I started by saying, I don't want to talk about the staggering statistics or the incredible growth rates, and I think that's because there's so much hype around mobile, and it creates at times inflated expectations. And I think Sir Martin said it best when he said, mobiles, they're the most overhyped medium in the short term and the most underhyped medium in the long term. So what I would stress to you is that we don't get caught up in the hype of mobile. It's really exciting and everybody wants to jump on board. But I think we have to understand the potential and marry this to the specific tasks that you have for each of your brands. So in doing so, think about what tactics can deliver each of those pillars, and then from there you can start to develop a robust mobile strategy that fits in with your current communications. Thanks.